thanks ever so much for inviting me to do this presentation. So the subject of today's talk is the Aberdeen Burgh Court Roll of 1317, which, as I'll explain later on in the presentation, is a really unique document, and one which Aberdeen is rightly very proud of. So just a little bit of background about myself. My name's Phil Astley, and I'm the City Archivist for Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire Archives. So the role of the archive is really to collect, preserve and make publicly available the historical records of Aberdeen City Council and Aberdeenshire Council. But we've also got a remit to collect privately created records as well. So that also means that we have some really amazing collections like those of Aberdeen Harbour Board, Norco, which used to be the Northern Cooperative Society, which was a big retail outlet in the northeast of Scotland for over 100 years. So it's quite a diverse range of material that the archive holds, and that's kind of reflected in the range of people that use us, and the range of inquiries that we get is really diverse. But as I said a moment ago, the subject of today's talk is the Burgh Court Roll of 1317, which is one of our older documents. So this second slide here gives you some idea of the strange kind of look of the document. It's quite an odd looking thing. It's 1.6 meters long, and it's got this funny what's called a breeve sticking out of one side of it, and we'll speak in more detail about that a little bit later on. It's made of 5 parchment membranes which are sewn together. So it's about 20 centimeters wide, and as I said, it's 1.6 meters long as well. Now, you might be asking yourself, so what is parchment? Is that like paper? Is it like vellum? Well, parchment is animal skin. Vellum is specifically calf skin, but this document is comprised of a number of membranes of animal skin. We're not sure what it could be. It could be sheep, it could be goat, it could be calf skin, but that's what was used as the writing material way back in the 14th century. So being 700 years old, or just over, this document provides an amazing insight into the legal workings of the borough around about the time of Robert the Bruce. So bear in mind that this document was written just 3 years after the Battle of Bannockburn, and it was recently translated by a couple of colleagues of mine who work at the University of Aberdeen and Edinburgh, respectively, Dr. Jackson Armstrong and Dr. Andrew Simpson. And that translation is published on by the Stair Society. And we recently had this document digitized by Workflo Solutions, and the resulting images of the document are going to be sitting alongside the translation of the document on the website of the Stair Society. So the document itself is normally kept in this really amazing room called the Charter Room, which is on the 3rd floor of the townhouse in Aberdeen. And the townhouse itself was constructed between 1867 and 1872, and the room that you see on the slide here was purposely incorporated into the building with the express purpose of storing the city's records. Now, the records of Aberdeen go back a very, very long way. It's actually the oldest and most complete civic archive in Scotland. I'm talking about the Burgh Court Roll here, which is 1317, but our oldest document dates from 1179. So you can see that the records of the city of Aberdeen really have a very long and illustrious lineage. So archives have a habit, as you can probably guess, of only growing in size. So while the core of the city's records are held in this room here, we've actually got more storage elsewhere in the townhouse, but we've also got another building in Old Aberdeen, which is where the bulk of our records are held. But it's lovely that this room still has the function of storing the city's records, and we operate a public service from both locations, so people can come in and access these documents for free. So it's fair to say that prior to 1398, the documentary evidence for the city, the surviving documents, are quite fragmentary. So you've got the Burgh Court Roll. There's another document called the Stockett Charter, which was granted by Robert the Bruce in 1319 to the people of Aberdeen. I've mentioned the document from 1179. There are a number of charters, 1179. There are a number of charters that are from the 13th century as well. But the records start in a more or less unbroken run in 1398 with these volumes that you see here. Now, I say more or less unbroken run because volume 1 starts in 1398, but volume 3, which covers the years 1414 to 1430, is missing. So we know that there are fragments of it copied into a volume at the University of Aberdeen's library, but we're hoping one of these days maybe it'll turn up on eBay or something like that, but I very much doubt it. We know that it was in existence in the 19th century, but even then it was described as being in a very poor condition. So volume 1 that you can see on the top shelf on the extreme left-hand side here, that starts in 1398. And as I say, apart from volume 3, they run in an unbroken run right up until the present day with the modern records of the council, which are obviously generated electronically these days. Now, volumes 1 through to 8, which cover 1398 to 1511, are recognised by UNESCO as being of outstanding historical importance to the UK. The reason for that is, as I said a couple of minutes ago, is that it's the oldest and most complete civic archive in Scotland. Now, these volumes are very much legal records. They detail the proceedings of the Bailey, the Gildry and the head courts, as well as elections. So I'll talk a little bit later on about some more of the content of these volumes, but they provide a really unrivaled insight into the workings of the medieval borough. And in comparison, other places like Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, their holdings, their coverage for this period is very fragmentary, and the only kind of comparable series of records is the records of the Parliament of Scotland. So it's amazing to have the UNESCO recognition, and that was gained in 2013, and that same year there were 10 other items inscribed on UNESCO's register, which included the Domesday Book and the Churchill Archive at the University of Cambridge, and the silent films of Alfred Hitchcock, which are held by the British Film Institute. So that gives you some idea of the calibre of the records that ours rubbing shoulders with. So moving back to the Burgh Court Roll, you can probably guess that being 700 years old, or just over 700 years old, this document has seen some much usage, and from time to time is in need of some TLC. So I think it was about 15 years ago this document was conserved, and I thought I'd just show you one or two of the before and after shots of this, because they're quite interesting. The roll was previously stored in this little kind of poster tube, so it was wound up very tightly. And as I mentioned earlier on, the roll is written on parchment, which is an organic material, and it has a habit of creasing really badly if it's kept folded up or rolled up for long periods of time. And being organic, it likes to kind of expand and contract with the minor changes in humidity. So you can see here, before it was conserved, it was very wrinkled. And you can see just on the right hand side of the image there, it was beginning to come away. The kind of the layers of the material were beginning to part company with each other, and you can see on the right hand side that there's a little split in the membrane there. So it was the University of Dundee that conserved this document, and what they did was to humidify it. So it spent some time in a humidifier, and it was gently stretched, so as it absorbed moisture at a very controlled rate, it was kind of held under tension and stretched, which kind of mimics the way that parchment was prepared before it was written on originally. These animal skins would have been prepared and stretched on kind of frames, so that you had a big sheet of animal skin, which was then cut to the dimensions that you see here. And you can see on the left hand side that it was wound around a wooden kind of pole, if you like, which is just over 20 centimeters long. And then the 5 panels of the document are stitched together, and this rather nice image here is a close-up of some of the stitching. So that gives you some idea of how those 5 panels are attached to one another. And here's the very odd-looking breathe, which was attached to the document. Now, this is quite an important element to the document itself, because it's the one element that helps us to identify the year of the document. It's the one item that mentions 1317, but it also references something else on the main body of the document. So we know that the document itself relates to one calendar year. Now, the breeve itself measures 7.5 centimeters high by 23 centimeters wide. and then the conservation process, you can see from this image here, what used to be a hole in the document has been kind of filled by very cleverly by the conservator with special paper, which gives the document a robustness which it didn't previously have. So it's amazing what they can do with these old documents. And then these days the document itself is wound around this very large cylinder, which is probably about 10 or 15 centimeters in diameter, and it's encased in 2 long sheets of Melanex. So it's this kind of clear inert material which won't affect the document in any way. So there are 2 sheets of that, one below and one above the document, and then it's wound around this cylinder, and that allows the document to expand and contract with the changes in humidity. So that's a brief kind of overview of the kind of physicality of the document itself. But you're probably thinking and asking yourself, well, that's all very well, but what does the document record, and what's it a record of? Well, it's very much a legal document, and as I mentioned just a minute ago, the document relates to one calendar year, 1317, and it's dated from that breve which sticks out of the side of the document. Now, we know that there were many, many more of these rolls at one point, and each one related to a separate year. Now, we know that because in 1597, the then town clerk, a chap called Thomas Mollison, made an inventory of the documents, and he talks about these older rolls being evil to be read. In other words, they're difficult to read. And that's because almost entirely these documents were written in Latin. But they record the meetings of the borough courts. Now, it's important to realise that it's not just one court that is being spoken of within the document and is being recorded, but it's a number of courts. Now, they tended to be the Bailey, the Gildry, and the Head Courts, and they had slightly different functions, but the document itself records more than just the proceedings of one court. And we also know from the document that these courts met in a place which is referred to a number of times within the court roll as in Tollaneo, which from the Latin that translates to toll booth, in other words, where the tolls were collected. Now, each borough in Scotland would have had a toll booth. The current one in Aberdeen just sits at the very corner of King Street and Union Street. But when this document was written, we think that the toll booth was located around about the current Ship Row area. So if you know Aberdeen, you'll know that Ship Row runs from Union Street down towards the harbour. So you get a sense from the document that this court was holding its proceedings within the toll booth, and you can get some sense of the activity that must have been taking place. Now, in 1852, it was reported that two of these rolls had lately been recovered out of a mass of useless paper which was decaying in a garret of the townhouse. So, as late as the mid-19th century, there was certainly more than one of these rolls, but this one that we're speaking about today is the only one that survived into the 20th century, and indeed into the 21st century now, and it's the earliest surviving example of such a roll anywhere in Scotland. So the roll itself reads as if it's dealing with a continuous series of matters and disputes. So it's essentially chronological in what it's recording, and that chronological arrangement breaks down only once towards the end of the document, whereby I think there are a couple of dates in October where one is the later one appears before the earlier one in the document, which kind of suggests that the proceedings of the court, there was probably a rough copy made, and then the roll that you saw the picture of was the kind of final good copy that was made. Now, there are references within the document of an operation of the common law as it applied to the boroughs of Scotland. So, we're not talking about the law as it applied just to Aberdeen here. There's a sense that there's a wider practice of law going on, and it's also interesting that the document mentions things like procurators, attornati, in other words, attorneys, and forespeakers as well. So you get a sense that people are appearing in front of the court on behalf of other people. And you might think of that as a relatively new practice in law, but it obviously dates back as far as the early 14th century, if not before. So taking a brief look at some of the cases that appear within the document itself. So I've picked out or highlighted three of them for you. Now, the first case that appears on the document is one relating to a woman by the name of Ada, and she was 17 years old, and she was asserting her right to what was called a toft, or a household and a tenement on the Gallowgate in Aberdeen. So you get a sense in the document as well of place names as well, place names that are very, very familiar to anyone who's got a passing knowledge of Aberdeen. There are a number of names that crop up that are still in use today. So this young woman, Ada, was asserting her right over this piece of land on the Gallowgate, but the land was held at that time by a chap called William of Lindsay, who was the rector of Ayr, and he was a really important man. He'd formerly served with Robert the Bruce as Chamberlain of Scotland. And the lands had originally been given to William in security for a loan, which was taken out by one of Ada's relatives. Now, there's quite a complicated kind of genealogy here that I won't kind of go into, but suffice to say that Ada was she was ultimately she had a claim on this property. So that led to a settlement being negotiated with William of Lindsay and Ada, and that is detailed in this court document. Now, part of the proceedings entailed Ada proving her age, and there was a woman by the name of Mariotta who was Ada's former wet nurse, and she was called as a witness to the court, and she's noted as appearing in the place where the court met. But the formal ceremony of conveyance of the lands took place in the open air. So it actually says in the document that the court rose and they went to the place where the land was to be conveyed from one party to the next. So you've got a sense of the kind of ceremony of the law and how it was operating as well at the time. So one of the subsequent cases in the document is this one here, which is quite humorous. It's a case of Richard Ledbetter versus John Lennie, and that takes place on the 5th of September 1317. And Richard Ledbetter accused John Lennie, husband and tutor of Beatrice, his wife, that on Thursday last the said Beatrice defamed and beat him with rang and unlaw in the house of James Fewer in the neighbourhood of Fitty. Now, Fitty is Fitty in modern day Aberdeen, which is a modern day part of the city with a very long history. It has a very proud kind of fishing heritage, but it's interesting that name crops up as well. So the damages of Richard are equated to 20 shillings there, and a number of people are noted as being called by the court, but they don't appear, and this case is kind of carried over. So that gives a little kind of flavour of maybe some of the kind of personal disputes that appear in the document as well. And then I put this one in here from the 3rd of October as well, which is regarding a chap called Walter, son of Ralph, he's noted as, and he protested that he was unable to recover his fee of 6 shillings and 8 of possible annual rent from a certain house with a furnace lying in the vicinity of the Kirkgate. So he kind of owns this house, and it's interesting that it gives the location as the Kirkgate, which once again is a place name that is familiar to modern day Aberdeen. And you know, it locates the house because of the fireplace or furnace within the Kirkgate, and it kind of implies that the furnace is more than just a fireplace. It's more of an oven. That's kind of borne out by the following entry relating to the case, and it says which house William, son of Gartanet, who was a baker, holds of him at Few Farm for 2 terms last bypassed on account of insufficiency of the tenement. So there's obviously something wrong with this property, that the Few is being withheld, and the court is trying to resolve this dispute. But perhaps, you know, because he's the son of a baker, it might imply that the furnace in question is an oven, which is being used for baking. So hopefully that gives you some idea of the kind of the content of the document, and the types of cases that were appearing within it. But just to give you a bit of context as well to the slightly later records, because important though the Burgh Court Roll is, it's kind of an isolated example, and it predates the subsequent volumes which I spoke about earlier on, which begin in 1398, and those are the subsequent means of recording the court business within Aberdeen. So these 8 volumes here that you see, which have the UNESCO recognition, they're kind of a continuation of the type of document that the Burgh Court Roll was, but they're volumes rather than these long rolls. So you could see this as a kind of change in technology from recording the proceedings of the court in these long forms to recording it on sheets of paper, which are then subsequently bound together. So these volumes record the meetings of the bailey, the guildry and the head courts, but they also hold things like the elections of the councils are detailed. There are the elections of the meat and the ale tasters, and the cases that appear in here are, the council, as you can probably imagine, got its fingers into every imaginable pie. So there's things in there to do with property disputes, to do with the trying to keep the plague at bay, to do with shipping, regulating the production of bread. Volume 8, for example, has a lovely set of illustrations of baker's marks within it. And there's also ordinances laid down which speak about, people shouldn't allow their animals to run around in the streets because they're eating all the people's cabbages and this type of thing. And there's some really nice insights into medieval life within these within the pages of these documents. And we've been able to do some lovely outreach work with these, with schools, and there's even a computer game that has been devised which is using stories from these volumes, which is just about to be released. But these volumes are important in not only a Scottish but a kind of a Northern European context as well. And I put this map in here which dates from 1579 to give you some kind of idea of that, because you've probably kind of asked yourself, well, why does Aberdeen have such an amazing collection of these really old records? Well, there are probably kind of 3 reasons for this. The first being Aberdeen's geographical location. So it's obviously quite a long way north, and because of that, it escaped the worst excesses of the Reformation, when an awful lot of documents were destroyed. But there was also a kind of culture of record keeping in the borough, and that's because trade was developing, the legal system was becoming more complex, and there was a need to write this stuff down. And it was critical for people to be able to refer back to these volumes as well. And you occasionally find within these volumes that they're noted as being brought to a certain place so people can consult them. So these were very much working documents. But there's also a hefty dose of good luck in the survival of any archive as well. So that's why they've persisted over all these centuries. But when you look at a map like this, you can see that Aberdeen was actually quite close to places like Bergen, to the Baltic, to the Low Countries, and trade was in some ways a lot easier via sea. than it was with, say, you know, the West Country in England, for example. So there are references within the volumes to ships and vessels from the Low Countries, from the Baltic, wine being traded from France, and you can build up a very vivid picture of how Northern European trade existed. And because of that trade, there's also legal links as well. Now, over the past few years, we've been involved with the University of Aberdeen on a number of projects. The most recent of which was called Law in the Aberdeen Council Registers, which transcribed the first 8 volumes, which are the ones recognised by UNESCO. And a recent and even more recent project is now comparing the legal practice within the borough of Aberdeen, which is evident in these records, to those of Augsburg in Germany. So that whole kind of European interaction with regards to the law and the legal systems is being compared by academics with reference to these documents and to these archives. So the document that you see open here is from volume 2, and as you could see, it's very text heavy, but there are 1 or 2 illustrations within these volumes, including this one, which is a lovely little kind of illuminated letter H, which has this face on the left-hand side, and on the downstroke of the H, you can see that there is the scales of a fish, and the fish has an eye as well. And I guess that's a little bit of a nod to the salmon trade in Aberdeen, which was very, very important. And salmon was more or less used as a bit of a currency in the borough at the time. Now, within these volumes, you can see watermarks as well on the pages. Now, it's quite interesting to compare the parchment that we saw in 1317 roll to the paper within these records, and an analysis of these watermarks has been done, and from that we know that the paper within these volumes came from manufacturers in northern France and also in Italy as well. So that again demonstrates Aberdeen's connection to Northern Europe and the trade relating to it. Now, just to give you, in conclusion, some kind of idea of the kind of richness of this collection. These are the 8 volumes from looking from the other side of the spine, if you like. So there are 5,200 pages within these 8 volumes, and a kind of visual representation of these is provided by this kind of bar chart here. So the bar chart shows comparative texts and the number of words. So the volume 1 through to 8 of the Aberdeen Council Registers holds well over 1 million words, and when you compare that to things like War and Peace, which is like the second bar down, that's got just over 500,000 words in it, and then the complete works of Shakespeare is the kind of rust-coloured bar chart. That's again under 1 million words, and then the records of the Parliament of Scotland are the blue and the green ones at different dates. So you can see the quantity of the material within the Aberdeen records is really quite incredible. So that's a brief overview of the court roll and its context within the city's records. Now, You know, if you want to contact me about the anything that has been said within the presentation, I'm more than happy to take emails through the email address there, and you'll find our URL at aberdeencity.gov.uk/archives. And then the project that we've been doing with the University of Aberdeen for a number of years, that has its own URL, which is abdn.ac.uk/ARO, which stands for Aberdeen Registers Online. So I hope that's been of interest, and happy to take questions.
Well, Phil, thank you so much. That was an incredible journey through. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of echo. Are you, or Caitlin, are you, yeah, thanks. Okay, is that okay? Phil, thank you so much. That was an incredible insight and a journey through the history of this document, and an insight into the history of Scotland. Just a couple of questions that occur to me. The role of the borough courts, so dating back to 1317, is that the earliest record of court proceedings that's still available?
Yeah, as far as records of the borough courts go, yeah. There may be records of the higher courts that are available, and certainly the records of the Parliament of Scotland predate 1317. But as far as borough records go, this is the oldest surviving court record in Scotland. So you know, it's a unique document from that point of view. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it is absolutely fascinating, and is that you made reference to a sense of there being a common law of Scotland, that obviously it was recording the borough courts in Aberdeen, but there was this wider sense of law in Scotland. Do you know at all if the various borough courts communicated their decisions to each other, or how any of that worked?
I think they probably would have done, in the sense that representatives from the boroughs would have travelled to and from the Parliament of Scotland, so there would have been an interaction that way. There would have been some interaction, I'm sure, from the Crown to the boroughs on a uniform kind of basis, instructing them to act in particular ways as well. So I think it was probably mainly top down, but there was almost certainly a kind of interchange of ideas as well. But there's, as I alluded to in the presentation there, there's also this sense that you get of law being transacted internationally as well. So you have kind of communities of Scottish merchants in places like Bergen, and also in the Low Countries and in the Baltic as well. And they would have taken their understanding and the practice of law with them in their dealings with the authorities in Norway or the Low Countries or the Baltic states as well. And so that's where that kind of interaction of the law within Northern Europe would have taken place as well, on that kind of mercantile, practical level, which I think is really interesting to consider as well.
Yeah, so do you think, and forgive me for being uneducated here in relation to this, but do you think these different jurisdictions, these different countries then influenced each other in a legal sense and around legal practice and thinking?
Almost certainly. Almost certainly. There are parallels within. I mentioned the records of Augsburg, and a current project which is ongoing between the University of Aberdeen and the University of Mainz in Germany, which is comparing Augsburg and Aberdeen and the various parallels. Now, I'm not a legal historian. I hasten to add, but I had the kind of privilege of attending a recent conference of this project, and it's fascinating to hear the insights which are being made between the legal practices within the two places and the parallels between the two records or sets of records as well. So there is definitely evidence that there was an interaction and an overlap. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, again, absolutely fascinating. So thanks for that. In terms of the stories that these documents throw up, I mean, they're obviously very enlightening and engaging. So the story you highlighted of Ada, you know, the young lady trying to assert rights over property. Was that something that would have been unusual at that time, do you think?
It was unusual, yeah. Quite apart from the fact that you know, she's a young woman, and that's really interesting. Now she must have you must have think that she had been given pretty good legal advice to be able to act in that way. Now, we don't know anything about her background really. We know some of the genealogical kind of connections because of the because they're detailed in the document, but you would have thought, or you would deduce that, you know, being from, you know, for want of a better phrase, a landed family, that she must have been a woman of some means to be able to take the case to a court of law in the first place. They are, you know, the stories that I picked out there and the other ones within the document, they are quite kind of tantalizing glimpses to the kind of operations, and that's all you get because of the fragmentary nature of the document. But I think it would have been quite unusual for a woman to have been in that situation. And you know, the case that I quoted about the man being beaten by the woman in Fitty. Now, that case is really being addressed to the two men, and the woman is kind of more incidental in that case, which is quite interesting as well. Now, whether you can deduce much from that kind of isolated kind of example, you know, is open to argument. But I think it's fair to say, certainly from the subsequent records, the ones that begin in 1398, that it was, you know, the law is quite male dominated, although that women do feature, and you get women named as, you know, you get them named alongside their occupations as well, which is really interesting. So you get women brewers, for example, appearing in the later records. You get women owning property as well, which is interesting. So as you might expect, it's mainly male kind of dominated and oriented, but there are interesting glimpses into the lives of women within the borough as well, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the idea that the reality that this document just captures something which at the time is, I presume, an administrative task, but in fact what it does for history is obviously just show the prevailing attitudes of the time. You know, simply in the way something is recorded, it shows it maybe does it from a male perspective or whatever it will be, and then centuries down the line, it's providing such insight as to what the reality of life was like at that time. It is incredible.
That's right, absolutely, and that's particularly the case in the later records when you get the kind of continuity of kind of record, because obviously the roll itself relates only to 1 year, but within the volumes, you know, they can cover, you know, in some cases they cover 15, 20 and more years. So you get that continuity of records, and you get people turning up time and time again in the records. You get occupations turning up time and time again. So, you know, fleshers, baxters or bakers turning up. The borough was obsessed by being able to provide food for the population and ensuring that the food wasn't adulterated, which is why the baxters are really important, the bakers, in other words. And also, as I mentioned earlier on, there's the lovely story from the 1460s of people being instructed not to let their animals run loose in the borough. And you can build up this picture of what it must have looked like and almost smelt like as well, because there's another ordinance that springs to mind, which is talking about the sale of fish and meat at the market cross on market days, and how those that are selling the meat, they must present it in a particular way, and they must have baskets for the offal to dispose of, and the place must have stunk to high heaven, you know. But it must have been quite a noisy place as well, with the market going on, and all that kind of activity as well. And so, you know, you can build up more than just kind of a legal idea of what's going on in the borough if you use your imagination, using the amazing work that the guys at the University of Aberdeen have done on transcribing these records. And you can find the digital transcription at the Aberdeen Registers online website. So you know, you can build up this really scintillating and amazing picture of life in medieval Aberdeen.
Yeah, especially so when you say about the street names, you know, the areas being the same and being referenced, and you're holding this document and you can almost, or you're looking at this document and you're really seeing it, you know, it breathes life into history, doesn't it? You know, how does it actually feel when you have this document and you're looking at it and the importance of it? I mean, is it quite to me, it doesn't do such things, but like, you know, quite an overwhelming experience to think that this is such an important piece of history?
Absolutely. I think the thing that always amazes me about these documents is when you consider how much they've witnessed and how much they've been through. I mean, you know, the 1317 roll and the volumes that I've been speaking about, you know, they've witnessed the Robert the Bruce, the Wars of Independence, you know, they've witnessed the Reformation, the Jacobite rebellions, not to mention, you know, the 2 world wars that have gone on. And then, you know, it's amazing to think that they've actually survived that time without being thrown out as well, because that's why I think the culture of record keeping in Aberdeen has been important over the centuries, and the council minute book from the 1590s that I mentioned fairly early on in the talk, where Thomas Mollison does an inventory of the records, and he actually instructs the council to provide him with what's called a meikle kist, in other words, a big chest in which to store the records. Now that meikle kist is still in existence, and it is housed at the Tolbooth Museum in Aberdeen, but that's kind of the forerunner to our current day archive. And also, when you think that, you know, during the Second World War, these records were moved out of the city in order that they would, you know, be protected against possible air raids in Aberdeen as well. So, as you say, it is a bit of an overwhelming experience, and you know, that's what fascinates me about archives, is that they are a tangible connection to the past. Whether it be a document like this, which is 700 years old, or a photograph from the early 1900s, you know, it's all that kind of tangible connection, which really brings history to life. And I think that's what is really appealing to people who have an interest in archives and in history, and it's a great part of the job to be able to kind of convey that to people in an entertaining way, or try and make it as entertaining as possible, you know.
Yeah, well, it's certainly been that, and I have to say, when you were outlining about, I think it was the University of Dundee, you know, the hydrating of the parchment, I think I was just thinking to myself, I would really not like to be the person doing that, just because you think, I've got this item, it's genuinely irreplaceable, and I am currently, you know, hydrating this, and oh my God, you know, the ink has disappeared or whatever. You know,
that's right. I think they do an amazing job, and it's a whole science in itself, that conservation work, and what they're able to achieve with restoring documents and works of art is really incredible. But yeah, they must be quite nervous, I think, when they're carrying out that type of work. And indeed, you know, when I took the Burgh Court Roll down to Workflo Solutions in Paisley to get digitized, it did make me very nervous taking it out of the building here and taking it away. And whenever I do that with any document, it always gives me a bit of kind of palpitations.
Yeah,
I like to see it back where it belongs, you know.
I can only imagine that we've all had a bad day at the office, and you think, well, there can't be a bad day where I destroy some piece of irreplaceable history. So the work that Workflo did to obviously take the item into a digital format, so that would be something that would have to be, I presume, done with great care in terms of possibly damaging do you know anything of that process?
Yeah. I mean, we have used that company before to digitize records, and they've got a proven track record with handling archival materials. So, you know, we knew that they were in safe hands. From our point of view, the thing with the document is that it's such an awkward shape to digitize, and they did a wonderful job in stitching the digital images together in much the same way as the original document is stitched together, so that the resulting image that you see, and you can zoom in and out to examine it more closely. You know, it's amazing to see the end result, and the resolution of the image is really high. So you can see the imperfections in the ink on the page and that type of thing. And you know, the reason for getting it done was to enable the translation of the document to sit alongside an image, so that people could make their own kind of comparisons if they wanted to do so. And both the translation and the image itself will be available on the website of the Stair Society. Now, I should have said earlier on that the Stair Society is a society that specialises in Scottish legal history, so it's got a strong academic interest in this type of document. But it will be wonderful to have the published version and the original image as created by Workflo Solutions on their website. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously, it provides an opportunity for scale so that more and more people can get to see something, near to the reality of the document, and it's also a permanent record that's there. That hopefully the document obviously remains intact and available and everything, but at least there is something there that you say, well, we have captured that in a modern format. So that's brilliant. I have to say that as you've been talking, Phil, and it's genuinely been really, really interesting. I've kind of feel emboldened to raise my game in relation to history, because it's something I don't think I'm particularly good at, but there is such so interesting, really, and also so much to learn. What we've touched on in terms of the legal system, even just the way that maybe operated there, so much learning in it as well. So thank you very much for everything you've covered.
Yeah, you're welcome.